Welcome, dear listener, to a journey through shadows and light, through choices and consequences, through a life that would touch the very fabric of the wizarding world. Tonight, we follow the winding path of Severus Snape, a man whose story weaves through love and loss, darkness and redemption, sacrifice and secrets kept until the very end. As you settle into your comfortable space, let these words carry you gently through the complexities of a soul who walked between two worlds, never quite belonging to either, yet shaping both in ways few could have imagined. Close your eyes and let your breathing slow as we travel back through time to a small industrial town where the smokestacks painted the sky grey and magic hid in the most unexpected places. This is a story of transformation, of how the choices we make echo through time, of how love can both destroy and redeem. So relax, let go of the day's worries, and allow yourself to drift into this tale of one of the most enigmatic figures in magical history. Our story begins not with spells or potions, but with a young boy watching the world from behind dark eyes, already learning that life rarely offers simple answers or easy paths. In the dying years of the 1960s, Spinner's End stood as a testament to industrial decline. The rows of brick houses huddled together like old men sharing warmth, their windows clouded with decades of soot from the mill that had once been the town's beating heart. The mill was silent now, its great chimney, a tombstone marking the death of prosperity, but the grime it had left behind clung to everything: the walls, the streets, the very air that young Severus Snape breathed. The house at Spinner's End was narrow and cramped, wedged between identical homes that leaked the sounds of life through thin walls: arguments, crying babies, the clink of bottles that promised temporary escape. But in the last house on the street, where the road ended in a tangle of brambles and broken concrete, lived a different kind of desperation. Here, magic and misery intertwined in ways that would shape a young boy's understanding of the world. Tobias Snape was a man defeated by life long before his son was born, a muggle who had married a witch without understanding what that meant. He found himself trapped in a world he couldn't comprehend. His wife could make flowers bloom with a whisper, could mend broken plates with a wave of her hand, yet she couldn't morse or wouldn't morse magic away their poverty. The bitterness of this paradox fermented in him like wine turning to vinegar, sharp and corrosive. Eileen Prince had been somebody once. The name meant something in certain circles, an old wizarding family, not wealthy but respectable, with roots reaching back through centuries of magical tradition. But she had fallen in love with a muggle, and love, as young Severus would learn, could be the cruelest magic of all. Cast out by her family for marrying beneath her station, she found herself trapped between two worlds, welcome in neither. The boy learned early to read the weather of his household. He could tell by the way his father's footsteps sounded on the stairs whether to hide in his room or venture downstairs. He knew by the slump of his mother's shoulders whether she had the energy to show him the small magics that were his birthright. On good days, she would teach him the names of plants in the overgrown garden, whispering their magical properties like secrets. On bad days, she stared at the wall as if she could see through it to some better life that had slipped through her fingers. Severus discovered his own magic, the way most magical children do, mice through emotion. He was 6 years old, cowering in the cupboard under the stairs while his parents' voices rose and fell like a terrible tide. His father's words were slurred with drink, his mother's sharp with disappointment. Something crashed, a plate, perhaps, or a picture frame. And Severus squeezed his eyes shut, wishing desperately to be somewhere else, anywhere else. When he opened his eyes, he was in the garden. Not the garden as it was, choked with weeds and littered with broken bottles, but as it could be. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, their petals shifting through shades that had no names. The air smelled of honey and summer rain. For a moment, just a moment, the world was beautiful. Then reality crashed back, and he was in the cupboard again, but something had changed. He had tasted power, felt it flow through him like electricity through water. He was special, he was magical, he was different from his father, and that difference was the first cold comfort he would wrap around himself like armor. The magic came easier after that. When the other children from the street threw stones at him, calling him names for his unwashed hair and threadbare clothes, the stones would veer away at the last moment. When he was hungry and his mother had locked herself in her room, tins in the pantry would open themselves, their contents floating gently to his reaching hands. When his father's temper turned violent, Severus found he could make himself very small, very quiet, almost invisible in the shadows. But magic couldn't fix everything. It couldn't make his father love him. It couldn't bring back the woman his mother had been before disappointment wore her down like water on stone. It couldn't wash the coal dust from the air or put food on the table when his father drank away his dole money. Magic, Severus learned, was not the solution to every problem. Sometimes it was just another thing that made you different, another reason for the world to reject you. School was a particular torture. St. Mary's Primary was a grey building that squatted in the centre of town like a toad, disgorging children at regular intervals. Severus, with his strange intensity and shabby clothes, was marked as an outsider from his first day. He was too clever by half, the teachers said, always knowing the answers but delivering them with a sneer that made them want to mark him wrong out of spite. The other children sensed his difference like sharks scenting blood. They couldn't name it, didn't know about magic or wizards or the world that existed parallel to their own, but they knew he wasn't one of them. His clothes smelled of the strange herbs his mother grew. He muttered to himself in words that weren't quite English. Once, when cornered by a gang of older boys, he had hissed at them like a snake, and they had backed away, suddenly afraid without knowing why. Books became his refuge. The public library was a sanctuary where silence was enforced, and his shabby appearance mattered less than his library card. He devoured everything fairy tales that he now suspected contained grains of truth, science books that tried to explain a world that he knew was far stranger than their authors imagined, histories that hinted at mysteries between the lines. Knowledge was power, and power was what he craved more than food, more than friendship, more than anything, except perhaps the love that seemed always just out of reach. His mother watched him grow with eyes that held equal parts pride and sorrow. Sometimes, late at night, she would tell him about the wizarding world. She spoke of Hogwarts like others might speak of heaven, a place where being magical wasn't shameful but celebrated, where knowledge was treasured and power respected. She told him about houses that became families, about feasts that appeared as if by magic because they were magic, about libraries filled with books that literally contained universe of knowledge. "You'll go there one day," she would whisper, smoothing his lank hair with gentle fingers. "You'll learn properly, not just the scraps I can teach you. You'll be somebody, Severus, somebody important." But in the grey light of morning, with his father's snores rattling through the thin walls and the smell of stale beer permeating everything, such promises seemed as insubstantial as smoke. How could he go to a magical school when they could barely afford his regular uniform? How could he be somebody when he was nobody, just another unwashed child from the wrong side of town? The answer came in glimpses of a wider world. Sometimes, on his solitary wanderings through the wasteland behind Spinner's End, he would find things that didn't belong. A flower that bloomed out of season, its petals shifting through colors like oil on water. An owl that watched him with two intelligent eyes, once memorably. A tiny dragon no bigger than his palm that breathed real fire before vanishing in a puff of smoke that smelled of cinnamon. These signs told him that his mother's stories were true, that there was indeed another world waiting for him. But they also deepened his isolation. He couldn't share these wonders with anyone. His father would rage about freakishness. The children at school would either mock him for lying or fear him for telling the truth. Even his mother seemed to retreat further into herself when he tried to share his discoveries, as if each proof of magic was a reminder of all she had lost. So Severus learned to keep secrets. Wonders follies win to keep secrets. He practiced his magic in hidden places. The abandoned mill, the overgrown railway cutting, the derelict playground where even the local toughs feared to go after dark. He taught himself control through trial and error, nursing bruises from failed levitation attempts, sporting singed eyebrows from experiments with fire. Control became his obsession. If he could control his magic, he could control his life. If he could master the forces that flowed through him, he would never be powerless again. He practiced making objects move with precision, not just the wild surges of accidental magic, but deliberate, focused intent. A pebble floating in perfect circles, a leaf dancing to his will, water flowing upward in defiance of gravity. The summer he turned 9, something shifted in the air of Spinner's End. The magical incidents became more frequent, more visible. Flowers bloomed in neighbors' gardens that shouldn't exist in Yorkshire. Cats congregated on corners, having conversations with their eyes. The milk soured faster, but the bread lasted longer. Those sensitive to such things, mainly the old women who still remembered their grandmother's herb lore, began to mutter about the Snape boy. Eileen noticed too. She watched her son with increasing worry, seeing his father's determination married to magical ability that already surpassed her own. She had been a mediocre witch, truth be told, accepted into Hogwarts more for her bloodline than her talent. But Severus had power that sparked from him like static electricity, power that needed proper training before it consumed him or exposed them all. She began preparing him more seriously for the world he would enter. Late at night, while Tobias snored in an alcoholic stupor, she taught Severus the things he would need to know. Wizarding etiquette that had been drilled into her as a child, the names of the sacred 28 families, the proper way to hold a wand, even though they had none to practice with, the theory of transfiguration, the classification of charms, the danger of the dark arts that nevertheless called to those who had known powerlessness. Never let them see you as weak, she told him, her fingers cold on his chin as she forced him to meet her eyes. The wizarding world isn't kind to those who show vulnerability. Be strong, be clever, be careful, and never ever forget that knowledge is the only power that can't be taken from you. These lessons were interrupted more and more frequently by Tobias's rages. The factory had closed permanently, taking with it even the hope of work. The dole wasn't enough to keep him in drink, and a sober Tobias was a dangerous Tobias. He had never hit his son. Some deep taboo stayed his hand, perhaps sensing that to strike the boy would unleash something terrible. But Eileen bore bruises that makeup couldn't quite hide. Severus watched it all with eyes that grew older than his years. He saw his mother shrink into herself, saw his father expand to fill the space she left behind with bitterness and blame. He understood, with the precocious wisdom of neglected children, that love was not enough. His mother had loved his father once, maybe still did in some twisted way. His father might even love them back, when the drink allowed him to feel anything beyond his own disappointment. But love without respect, without kindness, without basic human decency, what was that but another chain? The revelation shaped him in ways that would echo through his entire life. Love was weakness. Love was pain. Love was watching his mother cry silently into her pillow, thinking he was asleep. Love was his father stumbling home at dawn, reeking of failure and cheap whiskey. Love was the fairy tale that people told themselves to make the misery bearable. Power, though, power was real. Power was the magic that flowed through his veins. Power was knowledge hoarded like treasure. Power was control over himself and, eventually, over others. Power couldn't disappoint you, or leave you, or tell you that you were worthless while it nursed a bottle. As his 10th birthday approached, Severus felt change coming like a storm on the horizon. His magic was growing stronger, harder to hide. The other children at school had begun to actively avoid him, crossing streets when they saw him coming. Even the teachers seemed nervous, though they couldn't say why the pale boy with the intense black eyes made them want to look away. His mother grew more anxious too, though she tried to hide it. She spent long hours staring out the window, as if expecting someone. She jumped at unexpected sounds. Once an owl landed on their windowsill in broad daylight, and she shooed it away with panic bordering on hysteria. When Severus asked why, she only shook her head and muttered about not yet, not yet. The house at Spinner's End became even more oppressive. The walls seemed to press closer, the air grew thicker. Severus spent more and more time outside, wandering the industrial wasteland that was his kingdom. Among the rusted machinery and broken concrete, he practiced his magic and dreamed of escape. It was on one of these wanderings, as summer reached its peak and the air shimmered with heat and possibility, that everything changed. He had found a new place to practice, a small playground, long abandoned, where the swings moved without wind and the roundabout turned in slow, endless circles. He was making pebbles dance in complex patterns, lost in concentration, when he heard it. Laughter. But not the harsh, mocking laughter he knew from school. This was different. Now's bright and genuine and full of wonder. He froze, his carefully orchestrated pebbles falling to the ground with small clicks. Someone had found his secret place. Someone had seen. But when he turned, ready to run or fight or hide, he saw something that stopped him cold. A girl, about his age, with flame-red hair that caught the sunlight like copper. She wasn't looking at him with fear or disgust or even surprise. She was watching his fallen pebbles with fascination, and when she raised her eyes to meet his, they were the most extraordinary green he had ever seen. "Do it again," she said, and smiled. And in that moment, though he didn't know it yet, Severus Snape's life split into two paths, before Lily and after Lily. Everything that came before suddenly seemed like mere prologue. Everything that would come after would be shaped by this moment, this meeting, this girl who looked at his magic and saw not freakishness but wonder. The boy from Spinner's End had found something more powerful than magic, more dangerous than any spell. He had found someone who saw him, really saw him, and didn't turn away. And though he couldn't know it then, that simple acceptance would be both his salvation and his damnation, the light that would guide him and the fire that would consume him. But that's a story for another chapter. For now, there was just a boy and a girl in an abandoned playground, and magic dancing in the air between them, like a promise of better days to come. The summer Lily Evans entered Severus Snape's life was the summer the grey world of Spinner's End suddenly bloomed with colour. She was everything he wasn't. Now's bright, where he was dark, open where he was closed, loved where he was merely tolerated. Yet somehow, impossibly, she wanted to be his friend. Their first meeting in the playground had ended with Severus fleeing, overwhelmed by the unexpected acceptance in those green eyes. But Lily was persistent in the way only a curious 9-year-old could be. She returned to the playground, day after day, and eventually, inevitably, so did he. Drawn like a moth to flame, though he wouldn't understand the danger of that attraction for years to come. "You're magical too," he told her, on their second meeting, the words tumbling out with none of his usual careful control. "I've been watching you. The flowers bloom when you're happy. Your sister's toy horse, you fixed it after she broke it. You made it gallop around her room. Any other child might have been frightened by this strange boy's admission of watching them. But Lily Evans had spent 9 years knowing she was different, fearing she was wrong somehow, broken in a way that made impossible things happen around her. To have someone name it, to have someone say magical like it was wonderful, instead of shameful, it was liberation. "Magical," she repeated, tasting the word like spun sugar. "Is that what I am? Is that what we are?" And so began Severus's education of Lily Evans in the ways of the wizarding world. Every day that summer, they met in secret places: the playground, the copse of trees behind the Evans house, the abandoned mill that loomed like a giant's gravestone. He told her everything his mother had told him, embellishing where his knowledge was thin, desperate to maintain the wonder in her eyes. He explained about Hogwarts with the fervor of a believer describing paradise. The moving staircases, the talking portraits, the ghosts who attended lessons. Houses that would become families, sorted by an ancient magical hat that could see into your soul. Lessons in transfiguration and charms, potions and defense against the dark arts. A whole world where being magical wasn't just accepted but expected, where the strange things they could do would be refined and celebrated. Lily drank it all in with a thirst that matched his own. She asked endless questions, some he could answer, many he couldn't. What made someone magical? Why could they do things others couldn't? Were there lots of wizards? Where did they live? Why did they hide? Each question forced Severus to think deeper, to examine the fragments of knowledge he had gathered and try to form them into a coherent whole. In return, Lily shared her own world with him. The Evans family was everything the Snapes were not. Nick's comfortable, loving, whole. Her father worked at the local bank. Her mother kept a house that smelled of fresh bread and lemon polish. Her sister Petunia was pretty and popular, everything a girl should be. And Lily herself was the beloved baby, doted on and cherished, yet she was unhappy in a way that resonated with Severus's own isolation. Being different in a loving home, she explained, meant constantly fearing you would disappoint the people who mattered most. Every incident of accidental magic was followed by worried looks, hushed conversations, gentle suggestions that perhaps she should try harder to be normal. Love, Lily was learning, could be its own kind of cage. Petunia hates it, she confided one afternoon as they sat in the shade of an old oak tree. The magic. She used to like it when we were really little. I'd make her toys dance and she'd laugh. But now she looks at me like I'm a freak. The word hung between them, ugly and familiar. Severus knew it well, had heard it whispered and shouted, had felt it carve itself into his skin like a brand. But hearing it applied to Lily, bright, beautiful Lily, made something fierce rise in his chest. You're not a freak, he said with more force than he'd ever used before. You're special. She's just jealous because she's ordinary, and you're not. It was the beginning of a pattern that would define their relationship. Severus defending Lily against the world, Lily defending the world against Severus's harsh judgments. Even then, in those golden summer days, the fault lines were forming. As summer progressed, their friendship deepened into something neither had experienced before. For Severus, who had never had a friend, every shared moment was a revelation. The simple pleasure of having someone to talk to, someone who listened with genuine interest, someone who sought out his company, it was intoxicating. He found himself hoarding memories like treasure, the way Lily's nose crinkled when she laughed, how she bit her lip when concentrating, the precise shade of her hair in different lights. For Lily, Severus represented freedom from the suffocating normalcy of suburban life. He was mysterious and intense, carrying knowledge of a world beyond her wildest dreams. His magic was stronger than hers, more controlled, and she loved watching him make leaves dance or water flow in impossible patterns. But more than that, he understood her in a way no one else did. With Severus, she didn't have to pretend to be less than she was. They developed their own language of looks and gestures, inside jokes about the Muggles, a word Lily adopted with glee around them. They practiced magic together, Severus teaching Lily the control exercises he had developed through years of trial and error. She was a quick student, her natural power channeled through techniques that would serve her well in years to come. But the shadow of the future already loomed. Petunia's jealousy curdled into active hostility as she watched her sister disappear for hours with that Snape boy. She followed them once, spying on their magical practice, and what she saw confirmed her worst fears. Her sister wasn't just strange but genuinely other, part of a world that would never include her. The confrontation came on a humid August afternoon. Severus and Lily were practicing levitation with wildflowers when Petunia burst from the bushes, her face twisted with disgust and triumph. "I knew it," she shrieked. "You're freaks, both of you doing unnatural things." What happened next would haunt Severus for years. In his anger at seeing Lily hurt by her sister's words, his magic lashed out. A branch cracked above Petunia's head, falling with enough force to bruise. It wasn't intentional, or at least not consciously so, but the damage was done. Petunia fled in tears, Lily torn between concern for her sister and anger at her cruelty. "You shouldn't have done that," Lily said quietly, and Severus felt the first cold touch of fear. Not fear of punishment, but fear that he had disappointed her, that she would look at him the way everyone else did, as something dangerous, uncontrolled, wrong. But Lily's anger passed quickly, replaced by weary acceptance. "She'll tell Mum and Dad," she sighed. "They'll forbid me to see you." The thought was unbearable. Severus had tasted friendship, acceptance, something dangerously close to happiness. To have it ripped away now would be worse than never having had it at all. But Lily was already planning, her mind quick and practical. "We'll be more careful," she decided. "Meet in secret. They can't watch me every minute." And so their friendship went underground, conducted in stolen moments and hidden places. It added a thrilling edge of danger to their meetings, but also a weight of secrecy that would become all too familiar in the years to come. Severus learned to approach the Evans house like a thief, to read which windows meant Lily was free and which meant danger. Lily learned to lie with a fluency that troubled her, to create elaborate excuses for her absences. The strain showed in different ways. Lily's relationship with Petunia deteriorated beyond repair, each sister retreating into mutual resentment. Severus's home life, never good, worsened as his father noticed his increased absences and suspicious happiness. Tobias Snape had a drunk's instinct for finding weakness, and his son's new vulnerability drew his attention like blood in the water. "Got yourself a girlfriend, have you?" Tobias slurred one evening, blocking Severus's path to the stairs. "Think you're too good for us now?" Severus said nothing, having learned that words only fueled his father's rages, but his silence seemed to enrage Tobias more than any response could have. "Just like your mother," he spat. "Always thinking you're better, always keeping secrets. Well, let me tell you something, boy. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. And whoever this girl is, she'll figure it out soon enough." The words burrowed deep, finding every insecurity and fear Severus harbored. Because wasn't his father right? What could someone like Lily, bright, beautiful, loved, possibly see in someone like him? He was poor, ugly, strange. His hair was always greasy, his clothes always shabby. He came from nothing and would return to nothing no matter how much magic flowed through his veins. These doubts he shared with no one, especially not Lily. Instead, he wrapped them around himself like armor, letting them fuel his determination to be worthy of her friendship. He studied harder, pushing his magical abilities to their limits. He memorized everything his mother told him about the wizarding world, supplementing her fragmented knowledge with invented details when necessary. He would be the guide Lily needed, the protector she deserved, even if it meant reshaping himself into someone entirely new. As autumn approached, both children felt change in the air. Severus would turn 11 in January, Lily a few weeks later. Soon, his mother assured him, the Hogwarts letters would come. They would leave this grey world behind for one filled with wonder and possibility, but privately, new fears gnawed at him. What if the wizarding world judged him as harshly as the Muggle one? What if Lily found better friends, more worthy companions? What if Hogwarts, instead of being their paradise, became the place where their friendship ended? He couldn't know then that his fears were both unfounded and prophetically accurate. Hogwarts would indeed change everything, but not in the ways he imagined. The seeds planted in these childhood years mastered love and resentment, protection and possession, loyalty and betrayal, would grow in the Scottish soil into something beautiful and terrible. But for now, in the dying days of summer, there was just Severus and Lily against the world. Two magical children on the cusp of a greater adventure, their friendship a bright thread in the grey tapestry of Spinner's End. They made promises to each other as children do, always to be friends, always to protect each other, always to remember these perfect days when magic was new and anything seemed possible. The first leaves were beginning to turn when an owl arrived at Spinner's End. Eileen Snape took the letter with shaking hands, her face a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her son was going to Hogwarts. Her son would have the chances she had squandered. Her son would leave her behind in this grey prison of her own making. Severus held the heavy parchment with reverent hands, reading and rereading the words that confirmed everything his mother had told him. He was a wizard. He was wanted. He belonged somewhere beyond these narrow streets and narrow minds. His first thought was to tell Lily, to share this proof of the world he had promised her. But when he arrived at their meeting place, she was already there, clutching an identical envelope, her face radiant with joy and wonder. "It's real," she breathed. "It's all real." They read their letters together, marveling over equipment lists and spell books, wondering about house assignments and new subjects. For a few precious moments, the future was nothing but light and possibility. They would go to Hogwarts together. They would learn magic together. Nothing could separate them now. If only either of them had known how naive that certainty was. If only they could have seen how the very thing that should have united them would become the wedge that drove them apart. But prophecy is a rare gift, and perhaps it's better that way. Better to have those moments of perfect happiness, even if they're built on foundations of sand. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Severus accompanied the Evans family to Diagon Alley, his mother too ashamed of her fallen status to show her face in wizarding society. The magical shopping district was everything he had dreamed and more. Mouse shops selling impossible things, wizards in robes walking openly, magic sparking in the very air. He watched Lily's face as she experienced it all for the first time, feeling a proprietary pride as if he had personally created this world for her. When they bought their wands, his of blackwood and dragon heartstring, hers of willow and phoenix feather, he felt the rightness of their friendship confirmed by magic itself. Surely wands that worked so well together meant their owners were destined to remain close. Petunia's reaction to the Hogwarts preparation was volcanic. She raged and pleaded, wrote letters to the school begging to be admitted, turned her frustration on Lily with increasing viciousness. Petunia's Scunia's Petunia Mospultuni and Disu Wanti ear. The Evans parents, overwhelmed by a situation beyond their understanding, tried desperately to keep peace while preparing to send their youngest child into a world they couldn't enter. Severus watched it all with mixed emotions. Part of him was grimly satisfied to see Petunia's jealousy. Here was proof that the magical world was superior, that being different was actually being better. But he also saw how it hurt Lily, how she dimmed her excitement to avoid causing more pain, how she began to build walls between parts of her life that should have been whole. On their last night before leaving for Hogwarts, they met one final time in the playground where it all began. The swings creaked in the September wind and the stars were bright above the industrial haze. They sat side by side, not speaking for a long time, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. "Promise me," Lily said suddenly, "that we'll still be friends, even if we're in different houses, even if things change." "Always," Severus replied without hesitation. It was the easiest promise he had ever made. How could he be anything but her friend? She was the light in his darkness, the proof that he was worth knowing. Without her, he would slide back into the grey nothingness of Spinner's End. They sealed the promise with the solemnity of children who don't yet understand that some promises are beyond our power to keep. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, and if shadows lurked at the edges, well, they had magic, didn't they? Surely that would be enough to keep the darkness at bay. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Severus left Spinner's End with a single battered trunk and no one to see him off. His father was sleeping off another binge, his mother too broken to face the reminder of her old life. But none of that mattered because Lily was waiting on platform 9 3/4, her hair like flame in the morning sun, her smile bright enough to chase away any shadow. Together they boarded the scarlet train that would carry them away from everything they had known. Together they found an empty compartment and settled in for the journey. Together they pressed their faces to the window as London gave way to countryside, as the familiar turned foreign and wonderful. Other students joined them as the journey progressed. Lilius, a nervous boy named Remus with scars on his face and kindness in his eyes, a pair of giggling girls who would become Lily's dorm mates, a haughty boy with pure blood written in every line of his posture, who looked at Severus with interest and Lily with disdain. Already, the divisions were forming. Already, the world was more complicated than their childhood dreams had allowed. But for now, on this first journey, with the Scottish Highlands approaching and their magical education about to begin, Severus and Lily were still just two best friends, united in wonder and possibility. The boy from Spinner's End had never been happier. He was leaving behind everything he hated about his life, keeping the one thing he treasured. He was going to a place where his abilities would be valued, where knowledge was power and power was respected. He would learn everything, excel at everything, prove himself worthy of the magical world and of Lily's friendship. What he couldn't know, what none of them could know, was that the very things he hoped would unite them, magic, knowledge, power, would become the forces that tore them apart. The houses that should have been homes would become battle lines. The magic that should have been wonderful would turn dark and twisted. The friendship that seemed unbreakable would shatter on the sharp edges of choices and circumstances. But that was all in the future. For now, there was just the rhythm of the train on the tracks, the excitement of new beginnings, and two children from Cokeworth who had found magic in each other before they found it anywhere else. The Lily years had begun in earnest, and if they would end in tragedy, well, even tragedy can be beautiful in its own way, like flowers growing through concrete, blooming bright and brief before the grey world claims them back. The Great Hall of Hogwarts was more magnificent than even Severus's carefully hoarded imaginings had prepared him for. Thousands of candles floated in midair, casting warm light over 4 long tables already filled with students. The enchanted ceiling showed the night sky in perfect clarity, stars wheeling overhead as if the castle had no roof at all. It was magic made manifest, casual and glorious, and for a moment even his carefully constructed defenses couldn't prevent the wonder from showing on his face. Beside him, Lily gripped his hand briefly, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through his entire body. "It's real," she whispered, echoing her words from weeks before. But now the reality was overwhelming in its immediacy. They were here, they were part of this, they belonged. The Sorting Hat's song washed over the nervous first years, ancient words speaking of founders and houses, of qualities prized and divisions that ran deep. Severus listened with the intense focus he brought to anything important, cataloguing information, analyzing implications. Gryffindor for the brave, Hufflepuff for the loyal, Ravenclaw for the wise, Slytherin for the ambitious. He knew where he belonged. Najat had known since his mother first told him about the houses, with particular pride in her voice when she spoke of Slytherin. But watching Lily, he felt the first tremor of uncertainty. She was brave, braver than him in many ways. She had the loyalty of Hufflepuff, the intelligence of Ravenclaw. Where would the hat place her? And more importantly, would it place her with him? The sorting began, names called in alphabetical order. Black, Sirius, a handsome boy with an aristocratic bearing, swaggered forward, confidence radiating from every line of his body. The hat barely touched his head before shouting Gryffindor. The Slytherin table hissed with disapproval. Everyone knew the blacks were meant for Slytherin. It was the first sign that traditions could be broken, that expectations could be defied. Evans, Lily, too soon, much too soon. Lily was walking forward. Severus watched her go with his heart in his throat. She looked small beneath the ancient hat, but her back was straight, her head high. The hat settled over her eyes, and the hall waited in silence that stretched like eternity. Finally, the rip near the brim opened. Gryffindor. The red and gold table erupted in cheers. As Lily removed the hat, her face glowing with happiness. She caught Severus's eye as she walked to her new house table, offering a small smile that was meant to be reassuring. But he felt something cold settle in his stomach. Gryffindor. Of course, brave, bold, bright. Lily couldn't be anything else. More names, more sortings. Lupin, Remus, the scarred boy from the train, went to Gryffindor too, welcomed warmly despite his shabby robes. Pettigrew, Peter, a small, nervous boy who looked like he might faint, also Gryffindor. Potter, James, a boy with messy hair and round glasses who practically bounced to the stool, radiating confidence that bordered on arrogance. Gryffindor again. By the time Snape, Severus, was called, he already knew his fate. The hat settled on his head, and immediately he heard its voice, ancient and knowing. Ah, difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not the flashy kind, but the quiet determination to survive, to protect. And talent. Oh yes, remarkable talent. But where to put you? Slytherin, Severus thought desperately. Please, Slytherin, my mother's house, where I belong. Slytherin, you think? Yes, you could be great in Slytherin, but perhaps Gryffindor might suit you better. Your friend is there, after all, and you have more bravery than you know. No, the force of his mental rejection surprised even him. I can't, Slytherin, please. The hat was quiet for a long moment. If you're certain, but remember, our choices show who we truly are, far more than our abilities. Very well then, Slytherin. The green and silver table applauded politely as Severus made his way over, his legs feeling strange and disconnected. He was in Slytherin. He had gotten what he wanted, so why did he feel like he had already lost something irreplaceable? The feast that followed was a blur of rich food and new faces. His housemates were a mixture of types. Some welcomed him with genuine warmth, others with calculating assessment. The older students spoke of house pride, of Professor Slughorn, who favored those with talent or connections, of the common room beneath the lake where green light filtered through water. But Severus's attention kept drifting to the Gryffindor table, where Lily was already making friends. She laughed at something one of the girls said, her whole face lighting up in that way he knew so well. The messy-haired Potter boy was performing some kind of trick with his wand, making miniature fireworks that sparked and died above the table. Even from across the hall, Severus could see he was showing off, trying to impress. Family friend. The voice came from his left. An older boy with pale eyes and aristocratic features was watching him with interest. The redhead. We grew up near each other, Severus replied carefully. In Slytherin, he was already learning. Information was currency. Muggle-born, isn't she? I can always tell. The boy's tone was neutral, but Severus sensed the test beneath the words. She's brilliant, he said, allowing an edge of challenge to creep into his voice. Best in our year, I'd bet. The older boy smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. Talent comes in all forms, I suppose. I'm Lucius Malfoy, by the way. Prefect. We purebloods need to stick together, especially with the way things are going. But we can be flexible about half-bloods with the right attitudes. The implication hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Severus understood perfectly. He was being offered provisional acceptance contingent on his willingness to adopt the right attitudes. His mother had warned him about this, about the prejudices that ran deep in their house, but she had also told him that Slytherin connections could open doors that would otherwise remain forever closed to someone of his background. I understand, he said, hating himself for the diplomatic neutrality in his tone. The first weeks at Hogwarts established patterns that would persist throughout Severus's school years. In classes he excelled beyond all expectations. Potions came as naturally as breathing. He could see the interactions between ingredients, understand instinctively how heat and timing affected outcomes. Professor Slughorn quickly marked him as a favorite, praising his intuitive grasp of the subtle science. Defense against the dark arts fascinated him in a different way. Here was power with purpose, magic that could protect or destroy. He absorbed defensive theory with hunger born from years of helplessness. Every shield charm learned was a wall between himself and his father's rages. Every hex mastered was insurance against the bullies who had tormented him in Cokeworth. But it was in the darker corners of magic that Severus truly excelled. Not the forbidden curses, not yet, but the grey areas that most first years shied away from. Jinxes that caused lasting discomfort. potions that induced specific nightmares, charms that revealed secrets people wanted hidden. Hugh knowledge was power, and power was survival. His friendship with Lily became a complicated dance of schedules and house loyalties. They met in the library, supposedly to study together, but really just to talk. They found empty classrooms where they could practice spells without the weight of house colors between them. They walked the grounds on weekends, exploring the castle's secrets together. But things were different now. Lily came with stories of Gryffindor Tower, of midnight feasts and common room laughter. She spoke fondly of her dorm mates, of the boy named Remus who was so clever and kind, of how James Potter and Sirius Black were troublemakers but amusing ones. Each story was a small betrayal, evidence that she was building a life that didn't include him. Severus responded with his own distance, speaking vaguely of Slytherin activities, of advanced texts he was reading, of older students who were teaching him things beyond the regular curriculum. He couldn't tell her about the growing pressure to choose sides in the house's internal politics. He couldn't explain how wearing green and silver meant being viewed with automatic suspicion by many students and even some teachers. The first real conflict came in November during a potions class where houses were mixed. They were brewing a simple forgetfulness potion, and Severus finished his perfectly within half the allotted time. He was helping Lily adjust her heat when James Potter spoke up from across the room. "Careful, Evans. Wouldn't want to owe a snake any favors. They always collect, usually when you least expect it." The classroom went quiet. It was the kind of casual cruelty that passed for wit among 11-year-olds, but it carried the weight of centuries-old prejudice. Severus's hand tightened on his stirring rod, his knuckles white. "Ignore him," Lily whispered, but her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment or anger. "Yeah, ignore me," Potter continued, emboldened by the laughter from his friends. "Just like you should ignore Snivelus there. Greasy git probably doesn't even wash his cauldron between uses." The nickname hit like a physical blow. Snivelus. In one cruel moment, Potter had found the weakness Severus had tried so hard to hide and weaponized it. The poverty that meant he could rarely afford proper hair care potions, the shabby robes that marked him as different even among outcasts. All reduced to a mocking nickname that would follow him for years. Severus's wand was in his hand before he consciously decided to draw it. A hex was on his lips, one of the nasty ones he'd been practicing, but Lily's hand on his arm stopped him. "Don't," she said quietly. "You'll only get in trouble. He's not worth it." But looking at her face, Severus saw something worse than anger. He saw pity. She pitied him for being mocked, for being too poor to afford decent robes, for needing her protection. It was unbearable. He lowered his wand, but the damage was done. The moment had established dynamics that would play out over and over: Mice Porter as aggressor, Severus as victim, Lily as reluctant peacemaker. And beneath it all, the poisonous knowledge that in the social hierarchy of Hogwarts, a poor half-blood Slytherin ranked barely above a mudblood in many eyes. That night, in the Slytherin common room, older students who had witnessed the confrontation offered different kinds of support. Some counseled patience, Porter's type, always overreach eventually. Others offered to teach him darker curses. Sometimes you need to make an example, but it was Lucius Malfoy who provided the most seductive option. "You're talented, Severus. Slughorn speaks highly of you, but talent alone isn't enough in this world. You need allies, protection, a name that carries weight." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "There are those of us who appreciate ability, regardless of circumstances of birth. If you're willing to be flexible about certain matters." The price was clear, even if unspoken. Align himself with the pure-blood supremacists, distance himself from Muggle-born friends, and receive protection and advancement in return. It was devil's bargain, but one that many desperate students had made before him. Severus didn't answer that night, but the seed was planted. Every sneer from Gryffindors, every moment of being excluded for his poverty, every time he saw Lily laughing with her new friends, that seed grew a little more. The Christmas holidays brought temporary reprieve. Most students went home, but Severus remained at Hogwarts. Spinner's End held nothing for him but his mother's defeated eyes and his father's drunken rages. The castle during holidays was peaceful, almost dreamlike. He spent long hours in the library, devouring texts both permitted and forbidden. He practiced magic in empty classrooms, pushing his abilities farther than first-year curriculum demanded. Lily had gone home, torn between excitement to see her parents and dread of Petunia's inevitable coldness. She had promised to write, and her letters came regularly, filled with mundane details that Severus treasured. But between the lines, he read the growing distance. She spoke of explaining Hogwarts to her parents, of trying to bridge the gap between worlds. She was building connections he could never share, creating a life that existed beyond the magical world entirely. When term resumed, something had shifted. Lily was still friendly, still sought him out for study sessions and walks. But there was a reservation now, a careful distance. She had spent weeks in the Muggle world, been reminded of who she was beyond Hogwarts. And Severus, buried in dark texts and Slytherin politics, had moved further into a world she instinctively distrusted. The incident that would define the rest of their first year came in March. Severus had been exploring the castle's lesser-known passages, mapping routes that might prove useful. He was returning to the common room through a 7th-floor corridor when he heard voices, Lily's among them. Peering around a corner, he saw her cornered by a group of older Slytherins. He recognized them, Ms. 7th years with dark arts interests and pure-blood supremacist leanings. They weren't threatening her exactly, but their postures radiated menace. "Just a question, Mudblood," one was saying with false politeness. "How did someone like you manage such impressive charm work? Family secret, perhaps? Oh wait, your family doesn't know magic exists." Lily's face was pale but defiant. "Professor Flitwick says I have natural talent, something you'd recognize if you had any." The lead boy's face darkened. "Careful, Mudblood. Natural talent or not, you're still just playing with power that doesn't belong to you." Severus knew he should intervene. These were his housemates, technically his allies. A word from him might diffuse the situation, but speaking up would mean choosing sides publicly, abandoning the careful neutrality he'd maintained. It would mean risking his own position for a girl who spent more time with Gryffindors than with him these days. In his hesitation, the moment passed. Professor McGonagall appeared, her stern presence scattering the Slytherins like smoke. She escorted Lily away, but not before Lily's eyes found Severus in his hiding spot. The look of betrayal and disappointment in those green eyes was worse than any curse. Later, when he tried to explain, to justify his inaction, Lily listened with an expression that grew progressively colder. "You were there," she said flatly. "You saw what was happening, and you did nothing. I couldn't what? Couldn't stand up to your housemates. Couldn't risk your precious position." Her voice rose, years of friendship fraying with each word. "They called me Mudblood, Sev. That word you taught me, the one you said only horrible people used. And you just stood there. It's not that simple," he protested. "You don't understand what it's like in Slytherin. The politics, the expectations." "No," she cut him off. I don't understand how the boy who protected me from bullies in Cokeworth could stand by while wizards threaten me. I don't understand how you can make excuses for people who think I'm worthless because of my birth." The argument continued, each word driving the wedge deeper. Severus tried to explain the complexities of his position, the careful balance he had to maintain. Lily countered with the simple morality of right and wrong, of standing up for friends regardless of consequences. When they finally parted, something fundamental had changed. They would continue to meet, continue to study together, maintain the facade of friendship, but trust, once broken, proved impossible to fully repair. Lily began spending more time with her Gryffindor friends, finding in them the straightforward loyalty she had expected from Severus. And Severus, stung by her rejection and desperate for belonging, moved deeper into Slytherin society. The end of first year came with a mixture of relief and dread. The end of first year came with a mixture of relief and dread. Severus had proven himself academically, finishing top of class in potions and defense. He had gained tentative acceptance in Slytherin, though the price of that acceptance grew daily. He had maintained his friendship with Lily, though it was now a pale shadow of what it had been. As the Hogwarts Express carried them back to London, they sat in separate compartments for the first time. Lily with her Gryffindor friends laughing at James Potter's jokes and listening to Remus Lupin's quiet observations. Severus with a group of Slytherins discussing summer plans and making connections that might serve him later. The boy who had boarded the train 9 months earlier, full of hope and certainty about his place in the magical world, was gone. In his place sat a young wizard already learning the harsh lessons of divided loyalties and impossible choices. The magical education he had dreamed of was proving far more complex than mastering spells and brewing potions. As platform 9 3/4 came into view, Severus caught a glimpse of red hair in the corridor. For a moment their eyes met through the glass. Lily offered a small sad smile and a wave. He returned it, wondering if this was what growing up meant, watching the distances between people grow wider with each passing day. No matter how desperately you tried to hold on, the sorting hat had placed them in different houses, but that was just the beginning. The real sorting happened every day, in 1,000 small choices and compromises, and with each choice, the path back to that playground in Cokeworth, where 2 magical children had found wonder in each other, grew a little harder to find. The summer between first and second year passed in a haze of strained normalcy. Severus returned to Spinner's End to find his father's drinking had worsened and his mother had retreated even further into herself. The house felt smaller, dingier, more suffocating after the grandeur of Hogwarts. Magic was forbidden outside of school, leaving him feeling powerless in the place where he most needed power. He met Lily occasionally, but their encounters were stilted, weighted with unspoken recriminations. She spoke brightly of her summer family trips, Muggle friends, normal teenage experiences that seemed as foreign to Severus as ancient runes. When she asked about his summer, he deflected with vague responses, too proud to admit the truth of his home life. "I've been reading," he told her, which wasn't a lie. He had discovered a cache of his mother's old textbooks in the attic, including several on subjects not typically taught at Hogwarts. Dark arts theory, ancient curses, the kind of magic that promised power to those willing to pay its price. Advanced potions theory, some defensive magic. Lily frowned at something in his tone. What kind of defensive magic? Just spells, protection. He couldn't tell her about the curse that could flay skin from bone, or the jinx that could turn blood to ice. These weren't defenses against schoolyard bullies, but weapons of war, and he was learning them with the dedication of someone who never wanted to be powerless again. Second year began with established battle lines. James Potter and Sirius Black had cemented their reputation as troublemakers, their pranks growing more elaborate and often targeting Slytherins in general, and Severus in particular. They had discovered his poverty, his questionable hygiene born of neglect and limited resources, and made it a source of constant mockery. "Oi Snivelus" became a daily greeting, usually followed by a tripping jinx or a hair-thickening hex that made his already greasy hair even more unmanageable. They were careful to strike when teachers weren't looking, cultivating an image of harmless mischief while making Severus's life systematically miserable. But Severus was no longer the helpless first year. His summer studies had borne fruit, and he responded to their attacks with increasingly creative retaliation. A pustule hex that took Madame Pomfrey 3 days to fully reverse. A tongue-tying curse that left Black speechless for an entire transfiguration class. Dark magic that danced on the edge of acceptable, always with plausible deniability. The escalation was inevitable. Each prank demanded a harsher response. Each response justified crueler pranks. And caught in the middle was Lily, increasingly frustrated with what she saw as pointless masculine posturing. "Why can't you just ignore them?" she asked after a particularly vicious exchange that had left Severus in the hospital wing with tentacles sprouting from his face and Potter nursing a broken nose from Severus's retaliation. "Ignore them," Severus's voice was bitter. Easy for you to say. They don't target you. You're not the one they call names, the one they humiliate daily. That's because I don't rise to their bait. You're just as bad as they are, Sev. Always looking for a fight, always ready with some nasty curse. I'm defending myself. No, she said quietly. You're becoming like them. Mean, cruel, taking pleasure in causing pain. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. He did take satisfaction in his successful hexes, in seeing his tormentors suffer as he had suffered. But what Lily didn't understand was that cruelty was the language Hogwarts spoke. Kindness was weakness. Mercy was invitation for further attack. Only through strength, through fear, could someone like him survive. His Slytherin connections deepened as his relationship with Lily frayed. The older students who had initially viewed him with suspicion began to see potential. His skill in potions, his growing knowledge of dark arts, his willingness to hex first and ask questions later. These were qualities valued in certain circles. Mulciber and Avery, two boys in his year with similar backgrounds and darker inclinations, became something like friends. They shared his fascination with forbidden magic, his resentment of pure blood privilege, even as they desperately sought to join it. Together, they explored restricted sections of the library, practiced curses in abandoned classrooms, discussed theories that would have horrified their professors. Power recognizes power, Mulciber said one night as they huddled over a particularly nasty tome. Blood status, wealth, family name, those matter to the old guard. But the Dark Lord, they say he values ability above all. A new world is coming, Severus. One where wizards like us won't have to bow and scrape. The Dark Lord, whispers of him were spreading through certain Slytherin circles. A wizard of incredible power who promised to restore wizardkind to its rightful place, to end the dilution of magical blood, to create a world where strength mattered more than birth. To boys who had been scorned for their poverty, their mixed blood, their lack of connections, it was an intoxicating vision. But Severus's growing immersion in this world widened the gulf with Lily. She had found her own circle, Gryffindors, who valued courage and loyalty, who saw the world in terms of right and wrong rather than power and weakness. She was particularly close with Remus Lupin, the quiet boy with gentle manners and hidden scars. Their friendship, based on mutual kindness and respect, was everything Severus's relationships were not. The breaking point came during a defense against the dark arts class in third year. They were studying dark creatures, and the professor, a nervous man who would last only that single year, was discussing werewolves. Severus noticed Lupin's discomfort, the way he paled at certain descriptions, the careful way the other marauders, as Potter's group had begun calling themselves, positioned themselves protectively around him. Later, in the library, Severus voiced his suspicions to Lily. Lupin's a werewolf. She went very still. That's ridiculous. Think about it. He's sick every month, always around the full moon. Those scars, the way the teachers make excuses for his absences. So what if he is? Her voice was dangerously quiet. What difference does it make? Severus stared at her. What difference? He's a dark creature, Lily. Dangerous. He shouldn't be here around normal students. Normal students. She stood abruptly, green eyes flashing. Like you mean. The boy who spends his time learning curses designed to cause maximum pain. The boy who calls my friends mudbloods when he thinks I'm not listening. I don't. Yes, you do. I've heard you with Mulciber and Avery. I've seen the books you read, the spells you practice. You talk about dark creatures, but you're the one turning dark, Severus. The argument that followed was their worst yet. Years of accumulated grievances poured out. Severus accused her of choosing her Gryffindor friends over him, of being blind to their faults while magnifying his. She countered with his increasing cruelty, his association with future Death Eaters, his willingness to embrace ideologies that proclaimed her inferior. They didn't speak for 3 weeks after that. Severus threw himself into his studies with renewed fervor, as if academic success could fill the lily-shaped hole in his life. He excelled in potions, earning Professor Slughorn's highest praise. He mastered non-verbal spells years ahead of curriculum. He created his own curses, dark and inventive, scribbling them in the margins of his textbooks. The marauders seemed to sense his isolation and intensified their attacks. Without Lily's moderating influence, Severus responded with escalating viciousness. The pranks became more dangerous, the hexes more harmful. Teachers intervened when they could, but the boys had become expert at hiding their warfare. It was during this period that Severus made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Following the marauders one night, suspecting they were planning another humiliation, he saw them sneaking out of the castle. His curiosity overcoming caution, he followed them to the Whomping Willow, where he watched in shock as they seemed to disappear into a hidden passage beneath the tree. For weeks he observed their patterns, noting the correlation with full moons. His suspicion about Lupin hardened into certainty, but more than that, he sensed an opportunity. If he could prove the marauders were harboring a werewolf, helping him transform illegally, they would be expelled. His tormentors would be gone, and Lily would see he had been right all along. The trap was set by Sirius Black, though Severus wouldn't understand that until too late. Overhearing Severus's probing questions about their monthly disappearances, Black casually mentioned the secret of the Whomping Willow's knot, knowing Severus's curiosity would do the rest. On the night of the next full moon, Severus made his way to the tree. He pressed the knot, slipped into the passage, and followed it toward what he assumed would be vindication. Instead, he found himself face to face with a fully transformed werewolf, yellow eyes mad with hunger, claws extended toward prey. He would have died there, torn apart in the dark, if not for James Potter. His tormentor, his enemy, the boy who had made his life miserable, charged into the passage and physically dragged Severus back, risking his own life in the process. They tumbled out of the passage, just as the werewolf's claws raked the air where Severus had been standing. The aftermath was a confusion of shouting accusations and administrative panic. Dumbledore himself intervened, swearing Severus to secrecy about Lupin's condition. Black received detention but no real punishment. After all, he had only told the truth about the knot. Potter was lauded as a hero for his rescue, and Severus was left with the bitter knowledge that he owed his life to someone he hated. "He saved your life," Lily said when she finally cornered him. The incident had broken their weeks of silence, her concern overcoming her anger. "James risked everything to save you. He was saving his friend," Severus spat. "If I'd died, Lupin would have been executed. Black would have been expelled. He was protecting them, not me. Does it matter why? You're alive because of him. I'd rather be dead than owe him anything." She looked at him with such sadness then, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "What's happened to you, Sev? When did you become so full of hate?" He wanted to tell her it had happened slowly, like poison building up in the system. Every sneer, every hex, every reminder that he didn't belong had added another drop, but also his own choices. Every dark spell learned, every cruel word spoken, every opportunity for kindness rejected in favor of power. He was becoming what the world expected him to be, and some part of him welcomed it. At least hatred was strength. At least darkness was power. Fourth year saw the divide solidify. Severus fully embraced his identity as a dark arts prodigy, surrounding himself with like-minded Slytherins who spoke reverently of the rising Dark Lord. He corresponded with older students who had graduated and joined the cause, learning about a world where magical might made right and pure blood ideology provided structure and purpose. His appearance deteriorated further as he devoted every waking moment to his studies. His hair grew longer and lankier, his skin paler from hours in dungeons and libraries. He cultivated an aura of menace that kept younger students at bay and made even the marauders think twice before attacking. He was becoming the greasy git, the dark weirdo, the future Death Eater, every stereotype and insult made manifest. But in quiet moments, usually in the small hours when insomnia kept him staring at the green-tinted ceiling of his dormitory, he thought of Lily. She still spoke to him occasionally, brief exchanges that were shadows of their former friendship. She was growing more beautiful with each passing year, her magical talents blossoming alongside her physical development. Half the boys in school were in love with her, including, to Severus's bitter observation, James Potter. Potter's pursuit of Lily was as arrogant as everything else about him. He asked her out publicly, making grand gestures and proclamations. She rejected him repeatedly, but Severus saw the softening in her expressions, the way she tried not to smile at his more clever attempts. It was only a matter of time, he knew, before she gave in. Potter had everything: looks, money, popularity, the kind of casual confidence that came from never having been truly hurt. The darkness that had been growing in Severus crystallized into something harder, colder. If the world was determined to take everything from him, he would take power in return. If he couldn't have love, he would have fear. If he couldn't belong, he would rule. He began brewing potions of his own design, improving on textbook recipes, creating new combinations that shouldn't work but did. He invented spells that would later be classified as dark magic, scribbling them in the margins of his advanced potions textbook, Sectum Sempra. He wrote next to a particularly vicious creation for enemies. His former friend had become the embodiment of everything he couldn't have: light to his darkness, loved where he was despised, effortlessly good where he struggled with every moral choice. The playground where they had first met seemed like something from another lifetime, another world where a different boy had believed in friendship and happy endings. But that boy was gone, replaced by someone harder and hungrier. The darkening path stretched before him, and Severus walked it with determined steps, telling himself that power was worth any price, that belonging was worth any compromise. He couldn't know then how high that price would ultimately be, or that the belonging he sought would come at the cost of the only person who had ever truly seen him for who he was. The die was cast, the path chosen. All that remained was to follow it to its bitter end. Fifth year arrived with the weight of OWL examinations and the pressure of defining one's future in the wizarding world. For Severus, it also brought an intensity to his studies that bordered on obsession. He haunted the library like a ghost, his fingers stained with ink and his eyes red from reading in dim light. Potions had become more than a subject. It was an art form where he could exercise complete control, where his innovations earned even Slughorn's amazement. "Remarkable, my boy," Slughorn exclaimed one October afternoon, examining Severus's perfect draught of living death. "I've never seen a student achieve such a profound effect with such economical ingredient use. How did you manage it?" Severus didn't mention the hours spent experimenting with alternative cutting techniques, the discovery that crushing soporiferous beans with the flat of a silver knife released more juice than cutting. These were his secrets, recorded in his potions textbook alongside increasingly dark personal spells. Knowledge was power, and he hoarded both jealously. His reputation in Slytherin had solidified into something approaching respect tinged with fear. Younger students scattered when he swept through the common room, his black robes billowing like wings. The Death Eater sympathizers counted him as one of their own, including him in discussions about the Dark Lord's vision for a new world order. He listened more than he spoke, filing away information, understanding that knowledge of these people's plans might prove useful someday. But even as his star rose in certain circles, his isolation deepened. The other Slytherins respected his abilities but didn't truly like him. He was too intense, too secretive, too obviously damaged. He lacked the easy cruelty of Mulciber or the sadistic charm of Avery. His darkness was colder, more calculated, rooted in pain rather than privilege. Lily remained the one bright spot in his increasingly grey world, though even that light was fading. Their interactions had dwindled to occasional study sessions in the library, carefully neutral territories where house rivalries couldn't intrude. She was still kind to him, but it was the kindness one might show to a dangerous animal. Cautious, distant, ready to withdraw at the first sign of aggression. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said one evening, finding him surrounded by towers of books on advanced transfiguration theory. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal, or slept more than a few hours?" He looked up at her, struck as always by how the lamplight caught the gold threads in her red hair. The OWLs are in 6 months. Some of us can't afford to coast on natural talent. That's not, she sighed, sinking into the chair across from him. I'm worried about you, Sev. You're disappearing into yourself. These books, these spells, you're always practicing me as it's like you're preparing for a war. Maybe I am. The words came out harsher than intended. The world isn't kind to people like me, Lily. I need every advantage I can get. People like you. Her green eyes flashed. You mean brilliant, talented, or do you mean angry and pushing away anyone who tries to care about you? The accusation hung between them, too close to truth for comfort. He wanted to tell her that she didn't understand, couldn't understand what it was like to have nothing but your abilities to rely on. But looking at her concerned face, he realized with a pain sharp as any cutting curse that she did care, and he was indeed pushing her away. The tragedy was that he couldn't seem to stop. I should go, he muttered, beginning to gather his books. I have a meeting with Mulciber and Avery. The disappointment in her voice was palpable. Sev, those boys are bad news. The things they talk about, the curses they practice. They hurt Mary MacDonald last week. She won't say what they did, but she still flinches when someone moves too quickly. I don't know anything about that, Severus lied smoothly. He had been there, watching from the shadows as Mulciber tested a dark curse that invaded the mind, twisted memories. He hadn't participated, but he hadn't stopped it either. Another sin of omission to add to his growing collection. Don't you? Lily's voice was soft but cutting. You're with them all the time now, huddled in corners, practicing Merlin knows what. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think I don't see what you're becoming? And what am I becoming? He stood abruptly, books clutched to his chest like armor. Someone who won't be pushed around anymore. Someone who refuses to accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Someone cruel, she said simply. Someone who mistakes fear for respect and power for worth. He left without another word, but her accusation followed him through the castle's dark corridors. In the Slytherin common room, he found Mulciber and Avery discussing their latest plans with barely concealed excitement. There had been another attack. Muggles tortured in London, the dark mark glowing green above their house. The older students spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones as if witnessing the birth of a new world. He's recruiting, Lucius Malfoy mentioned casually as he passed their group. Now in his 7th year, Malfoy carried himself with the confidence of someone who already had one foot in the larger world. The Dark Lord seeks those with talent and proper understanding. Your skills haven't gone unnoticed, Severus. The implication sent a thrill through him that he couldn't entirely suppress. To be noticed, to be wanted for his abilities rather than tolerated despite his blood status. It was everything he had craved. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Lily's voice whispered warnings about the price of such belonging. Spring arrived with its usual mixture of hope and tension. OWL preparation consumed everyone's attention, but beneath the academic stress, social dynamics were shifting. James Potter's pursuit of Lily had intensified, though she continued to rebuff him with increasing irritation. He's an arrogant tuerag, she complained to her friends within Severus's hearing. Hexing people for fun, showing off every chance he gets. I wouldn't date him if he were the last wizard on Earth. But Severus noticed the way her eyes sometimes lingered on Potter during Quidditch matches, the reluctant smile when he performed particularly spectacular stunts on his broomstick. Potter was changing too, showing flashes of the man he might become, mice protective of younger students, loyal to his friends, brave in a showy but genuine way. Everything Severus was not. The tension between Severus and the Marauders had evolved from schoolboy rivalry into something darker. Their pranks had sharp edges now, designed to humiliate rather than amuse. Severus retaliated with curses that left lasting marks, physical and psychological. The teachers seemed helpless to stop the escalating warfare, or perhaps they simply chose not to see how dangerous it was becoming. It was a warm June day when everything came to a head. While examinations were in full swing, the tension in the castle palpable. Severus had just completed his defense against the dark arts theoretical exam, confident he had achieved outstanding marks. The questions on dark creatures and counter-curses had been almost insultingly easy for someone who had been studying advanced texts since second year. He settled under a beech tree near the lake to review his transfiguration notes, trying to ignore the group of Gryffindors lounging nearby. The marauders were there, Potter playing with a stolen snitch, Black lounging with studied casualness, Lupin reading, Pettigrew watching Potter with his usual hero worship. The first sign of trouble was Potter's raised voice. "All right, Snivelus." Severus's hand moved instinctively toward his wand, but he was a fraction too slow. Before he could draw it, he was hanging upside down in the air, his robes falling over his head to reveal graying underpants and skinny, pallid legs. The laughter that erupted from the gathering crowd was like acid on his skin. "Who wants to see me take off Snively's pants?" Potter asked loudly, playing to his audience like the performer he was. The humiliation was total, absolute. Not just the physical exposure but the complete powerlessness, the reduction of all his knowledge and skill to nothing in the face of Potter's casual cruelty. Students were gathering, pointing, laughing. Some looked uncomfortable, but not enough to intervene. Through the roar of blood in his ears, Severus heard a wonderfully familiar voice. "Let him down." Lily had arrived, her face flushed with anger, her wand already in her hand. For a moment Severus felt a surge of hope. She had come to save him, as she had so many times before. But the hope curdled quickly into fresh humiliation. To be rescued by her, in front of everyone, was almost worse than the original attack. "Evans, don't make me hex you," Potter said, though his tone suggested he'd rather do anything but take the curse off him then. Potter released him, and Severus crashed to the ground in a heap of tangled limbs and robes. As he struggled to his feet, wand finally in hand, the crowd tensed in anticipation of his retaliation. But before he could act, Lily stepped up between him and the marauders. "You're as bad as he is," she told Potter coldly. "What?" Potter looked genuinely shocked. "I'd never call you a you-know-what, messing up your hair because you think it looks cool to look like you've just got off your broomstick, showing off with that stupid snitch, walking down corridors and hexing anyone who annoys you just because you can. I'm surprised your broomstick can get off the ground with that fat head on it. You make me sick." She turned to leave, and in that moment, Severus made the worst mistake of his life. The humiliation, the anger, the frustrated love, and the wounded pride all crystallized into a single poisonous moment of spite. "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her." The words seemed to hang in the air like a curse, visible and irreversible. The crowd went silent. Even Potter looked shocked, but no one looked more stunned than Lily, who turned back slowly, her face draining of color. "Fine," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I won't bother in future, and I'd wash your pants if I were you, Snivelus." She walked away with her head high, but Severus saw the way her hands trembled. Potter and Black resumed their torment, but Severus barely noticed. His world had narrowed to the sight of Lily's retreating back, to the knowledge that he had just destroyed the one good thing in his life, with 2 words. Later, he waited outside the Gryffindor common room for hours, ignoring the hostile looks from passing students. When she finally emerged, he was ready with apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for forgiveness. "I'm sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I was angry. I was humiliated. I know exactly what you were," she interrupted, her voice cold as he'd never heard it. "You've chosen your way. I've chosen mine. No, listen, I didn't mean to call me mudblood, but you call everyone of my birth mudblood. Severus, why should I be any different?" The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He had adopted the language of his housemates, the casual bigotry that marked someone as belonging. He had told himself it meant nothing, that it was just words, just fitting in. But words had power, as any wizard knew, and these words had the power to destroy. "You're my best friend, Lily, my only friend. Please, I've been making excuses for you for years," she said, and now her voice was tired rather than angry. "Your friends are Death Eaters in training. You're fascinated by the dark arts. You call people of my birth that horrible name, and worst of all, you don't even see what's wrong with any of it." "I do, I see it now. I'll change. It's too late, Severus. I can't keep watching you become something awful. I can't keep pretending that the boy I grew up with is still in there somewhere, when he clearly isn't." She turned to go, then paused. "You know what the saddest part is? You're brilliant. You could be anything, do anything, but you're so full of hate and bitterness that you're going to waste it all on revenge and dark magic, and impressing people who will never truly accept you anyway." Then she was gone, and Severus was left alone in the corridor with the wreckage of his life. He had called her the unforgivable word, the one that reduced her to less than human in the eyes of people he was trying to impress. He had chosen belonging with those who would never truly accept him over friendship with the one person who had seen him as he truly was. That night, he lay awake, replaying the scene over and over, each iteration finding new depths of self-loathing. He thought of all the moments that had led to this mess, every dark spell learned, every cruel word spoken, every compromise made in the name of power and acceptance. He had built his own prison brick by brick, and now he was trapped inside with only his hatred for company. The remaining weeks of term passed in a blur of misery. Lily wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't even look at him. The marauders, perhaps sensing his complete defeat, left him alone. Even his Slytherin associates seemed to pull back, as if his spectacular self-destruction was contagious. He threw himself into his studies with renewed desperation, achieving outstanding in all his OWLs except divination and history of magic. But the triumph felt hollow. What good were perfect scores when he had failed the only test that truly mattered? On the train ride home, he caught one last glimpse of Lily. She was sitting with her friends, the sunlight through the window turning her hair to flame. She was laughing at something, her whole face alight with joy, and Severus realized with crushing finality that she was happier without him. He had been a shadow on her brightness, a weight dragging her down. Perhaps his cruelest act was not the word he had spoken, but all the years he had held her back with his darkness. Spinner's End had never looked more welcoming, which spoke volumes about his state of mind. He locked himself in his room and spent the summer creating new spells, brewing experimental potions, anything to avoid thinking about green eyes filled with disappointment and words that could never be taken back. But late at night, when even his relentless activity couldn't keep the thoughts at bay, he remembered a playground and a girl who had looked at his magic with wonder instead of fear. He remembered promises of friendship eternal and the feeling of being truly seen and accepted. He remembered the exact moment when he had traded it all for the approval of people who despised everything she represented. The breaking point had passed. The cracks that had been forming for years had finally shattered completely. What emerged from the wreckage was someone harder, colder, more determined than ever to accumulate power. If he couldn't have love, he would have fear. If he couldn't have acceptance, he would have respect. If he couldn't have Lily, he would have revenge on everyone and everything that had taken her from him, including himself, especially himself. The path ahead was darker than ever, but at least now he walked it without illusions. He had chosen his way, as Lily had said. Now all that remained was to follow it to whatever bitter end awaited. The boy who had once made flowers dance for a red-haired girl's delight was gone. In his place stood Severus Snape, future Death Eater, master of the dark arts, and architect of his own damnation. The worst part was that somewhere, in a part of his heart, he could never quite kill. He still loved her. He would always love her. And that love would be both his greatest weakness and perhaps his only chance at redemption. But redemption was a long way off, and the darkness was so much closer. The summer after Severus's disastrous 5th year stretched endlessly in the grimy confines of Spinner's End. His father's drinking had reached new depths, and his mother had all but disappeared into herself, a ghost haunting her own life. But Severus barely noticed. He was consumed by a different kind of haunting green eyes filled with disgust, a single word that had severed the last thread connecting him to anything good in his life. He spent his days in fevered study, pushing his magical knowledge into increasingly dark territories. The margins of his textbooks filled with original spells, each more vicious than the last. Sectum Sempra was refined and tested on rats he caught in the cellar, watching with clinical detachment as invisible swords slashed through fur and flesh. He told himself it was academic interest, defensive preparation, but in the darkest hours of night, he admitted the truth: he was preparing for war. The letter came in late July, delivered not by Owl but by a figure in dark robes who appeared at his door with barely a sound. His mother answered, and Severus heard her sharp intake of breath, the whispered "No, not my son," that told him everything he needed to know about his visitor. Lucius Malfoy stood in their shabby sitting room like a prince visiting peasants, his expensive robes and aristocratic bearing making everything around him look even more pathetic by comparison. But his grey eyes held something that made Severus straighten his spine: respect. Severus Malfoy said smoothly, ignoring his parents entirely. "I trust you've been having a productive summer." "Productive enough," Severus replied carefully. "Excellent. There are those who have noticed your talents, your innovations in potion making, your creative approach to defensive magic." The slight emphasis on defensive made it clear he knew exactly what kind of spells Severus had been creating. "There's a gathering next week. Select individuals who understand that the wizarding world stands at a crossroads. I thought you might be interested in attending." The invitation was everything Severus had been working toward, yet now that it was here, he hesitated. This was a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. But what did he have to lose? Lily was gone. Hogwarts held nothing for him but mockery and mediocrity. This was a chance to be valued, to belong, to have power. "I'm interested," he said. Malfoy's smile was sharp as a blade. "I thought you might be. Midnight, next Saturday. I'll send coordinates." He paused at the door, looking back with calculating eyes. "Oh, and Severus, come alone, and tell no one." The week passed in a haze of anticipation and dread. Severus prepared carefully, brewing potions that might prove useful, practicing shields and curses until his wand movements were perfect. He told himself he was just going to listen, to learn. He didn't have to commit to anything. The coordinates led to a manor house that made Malfoy's wealth look modest by comparison. Ancient wards prickled against his skin as he crossed the threshold. Inside, he found a gathering of perhaps 30 witches and wizards. Some he recognized from Hogwarts Slytherin alumni, others strangers with the kind of careful blankness that suggested dangerous secrets. And at the center of it all, him, Lord Voldemort, was nothing like Severus had imagined. Handsome in a cold, sharp way, with dark eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. When those eyes turned to Severus, he felt exposed in a way that made Potter's public humiliation seem like nothing. "Severus Snape," Voldemort said, and his voice was silk over steel. "Lucius speaks highly of your abilities. Tell me, what is it you seek?" The question cut to the heart of everything. What did he seek? Power, belonging, revenge, all of those and none of them. But one answer rose above the others, surprising him with its honesty. "Knowledge," he said, "and the freedom to use it." Voldemort smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful at once. "Knowledge. Yes, I can see it in you. The hunger for understanding, for pushing beyond the boundaries others accept. You've been held back, haven't you? By poverty, by blood prejudice, by the small minds that run our institutions." Every word was perfectly chosen, finding the cracks in Severus's defenses and prying them open. This was legilimency of the highest order, so subtle he could barely feel it. But he didn't resist. What was the point? His mind was an open book of resentment and ambition. "I can offer you knowledge beyond your wildest dreams," Voldemort continued. "Magic that the Ministry forbids, not because it's dark, but because it's powerful. I can offer you a place in a new world where ability matters more than birth, where the artificial constraints placed on our kind are finally lifted. And in return, Severus asked, though he already knew the answer, loyalty, service, the willingness to do what must be done to achieve our vision. Voldemort's eyes never left his. I won't lie to you, Severus. The path I offer is not easy. It requires sacrifice, determination, the strength to move beyond conventional morality. But for those with the courage to walk it, the rewards are beyond imagining. Looking around the room at the faces of those who had already chosen this path, Severus saw what he had always craved: acceptance, respect, purpose. These people looked at him and saw potential rather than problems. They valued his darkness rather than trying to reform it.
Yeah.
I want to learn, he heard himself saying. I want to understand. Then learn you shall, Voldemort said softly. But first, a demonstration of commitment. Nothing binding, not yet. Simply a test of your resolve. What followed was his first real lesson in dark magic. Not the schoolboy hexes he had been playing with, but true darkness. Voldemort demonstrated curses that made Sectum Sempra look like a healing charm. Magic that could twist minds, break souls, reshape reality itself. The power of it was intoxicating, terrifying, everything Severus had dreamed and feared. You have natural talent, Voldemort observed as Severus successfully performed a Cruciatus curse on a training dummy, making it writhe in simulated agony. But talent must be refined, focused. Continue your studies at Hogwarts. Excel in your NEWT. I have plans for those with your particular skills, and formal qualifications will be useful. The gathering concluded with no oaths sworn, no marks given. This was recruitment, not initiation. But Severus left knowing he had already made his choice. The way Voldemort had looked at him, had seen his potential rather than his flaws, had offered him everything he had ever wanted. How could he refuse? Returning to Hogwarts for his 6th year, Severus felt changed in fundamental ways. He walked taller, spoke with more authority, radiated a dangerous confidence that made even the marauders think twice before targeting him. His magical abilities, already formidable, seemed to have quantum leaped. Spells came easier, potions bent to his will, even his invented curses grew more elegant and deadly. But the biggest change was in how he saw the world. Everything Voldemort had said made terrible sense. Why should wizards hide from muggles? Why should magical knowledge be restricted by a corrupt ministry? Why should purebloods like Malfoy look down on him when his abilities far exceeded theirs? The Dark Lord offered a revolution, a complete reordering of their society, and revolutions required revolutionaries. He threw himself into recruiting with subtle fervor, not openly, that would be foolish, but careful conversations with like-minded students, pointed questions about blood prejudice and ministry corruption, demonstrations of magic that hinted at darker knowledge. He became a spider in the center of a web, drawing in those who hungered for more than Hogwarts' sanitized education. His relationship with Lily became a wound that wouldn't heal. He saw her in corridors, in classes, always surrounded by friends who looked at him with disgust or fear. Potter's pursuit of her had intensified, and while she still rejected him, her rejection seemed softer, tinged with amusement rather than irritation. Once they found themselves alone in the potion storeroom, reaching for the same jar of beetle eyes. For a moment, they stood frozen, hands almost touching, the familiar scent of her shampoo making his chest tight with loss. "Severus," she said quietly, and for a heartbeat he thought she might forgive him, might give him another chance. But then her expression hardened. "I heard about your new friends, Death Eaters in training, the lot of them. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." Her voice was tired. "You've chosen your side. Just be careful. That kind of darkness, it consumes people, even brilliant people, especially brilliant people." She left with the beetle eyes, and he stood in the storeroom trying to breathe around the ache in his chest. She was right, of course. The darkness was consuming him, but it was also filling the hollow spaces she had left behind, giving him purpose and direction. If he couldn't have love, he would have power. If he couldn't protect her, he would protect himself. The school year progressed in a blur of advanced study and careful recruitment. Severus corresponded with Voldemort's followers using coded messages, reporting on potential recruits and ministry children at school. He refined his occlumency, essential for keeping secrets in a castle full of accomplished legilimens. He created new potions, including improvements to healing drafts that could also be reversed to cause harm, dual-purpose magic that appealed to Voldemort's pragmatism. The Christmas holidays brought another summons, this time to a different location. The gathering was smaller, more intimate. Voldemort spent hours with Severus personally, teaching him magic that had no names, showing him how to push beyond the boundaries of what was considered possible. "You have the makings of a true potions master," Voldemort said one evening, as they worked on a consciousness-expanding brew that would allow deeper penetration into victims' minds. "But more than that, you understand the artistry of it. Magic is not just power, Severus, it's creation. It's taking the raw materials of reality and reshaping them to your will." "Is that what you're doing?" Severus asked carefully. "Reshaping reality. I'm reshaping society," Voldemort corrected. "The magical world has stagnated, constrained by fear and false morality. We hide from muggles we could easily dominate. We restrict knowledge that could elevate us to near godhood. We allow the pollution of our bloodlines, the weakening of our power." Severus thought of Lily, brilliant and muggle-born, more talented than a dozen pure bloods combined. But he said nothing. He was learning that survival in this new world meant keeping certain thoughts buried deep. "You doubt the blood purity aspect," Voldemort observed, those terrible eyes seeing too much. "You think of your muggle-born friend, the girl who rejected you. There was no point in denial. She's more powerful than most pure bloods I know. Individual exceptions don't disprove the rule," Voldemort said smoothly. "And power isn't everything. Culture, tradition, understanding of our true nature, these matter too. But I'm not unreasonable, Severus. Talent should be cultivated wherever it's found. In my new world, exceptional muggle-borns could earn their place through service and proof of loyalty." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a lie that let Severus continue down this path without confronting the fundamental contradiction of serving someone who would destroy the only person he had ever loved. He filed it away with all the other compromises, telling himself that when the time came, he would find a way to protect her. Returning to Hogwarts after the holidays, Severus found the atmosphere changed. Whispers of disappearances, of dark marks appearing over Muggle houses, of a war beginning to take shape. The divisions in the school deepened, those who supported the Dark Lord's vision, those who opposed it, and the many who just wanted to keep their heads down and survive. Severus walked between all worlds. To his Death Eater associates, he was a committed recruit. To the general school population, he was a dangerous loner to be avoided. To the teachers, he was a brilliant but troubled student who might still be saved. And to Lily, he was already lost. He watched from afar as she began to soften toward Potter. The arrogant boy was changing, showing flashes of genuine leadership and nobility. He still hexed Snape when given the chance, but he had stopped targeting random students for fun. He was growing up, becoming the man Lily could respect and maybe even love. The irony wasn't lost on Severus. Potter was becoming worthy of Lily just as Severus was moving beyond any hope of redemption. It was as if the universe was ensuring maximum pain, twisting the knife with exquisite precision. By the end of 6th year, Severus had made his final choice. The summer would bring his full initiation into Voldemort's ranks. He would take the mark, swear the oaths, become what he had been moving towards since that first meeting. Part of him screamed in protest, the part that remembered sunshine and friendship, and a girl who had seen him as more than his circumstances. But that part grew quieter each day, smothered under ambition and bitterness, and the seductive whisper of belonging. On the last day of term, he saw Lily by the lake, the same spot where he had lost her forever. She was sitting with her friends, but for a moment she was alone, reading a book with that little furrow of concentration between her brows that he knew so well. He wanted to go to her, to warn her about what was coming, to beg one more time for forgiveness. But what could he say? that he was about to join an organization dedicated to eliminating people like her, that he loved her but not enough to choose her over power, that he was sorry but not sorry enough to change course. Instead, he watched from the shadows as Potter approached her, as she smiled and made room for him on the grass, as they talked and laughed and shared the kind of easy companionship Severus had thrown away. He watched until he couldn't bear it anymore, then turned and walked back to the castle, to pack his few belongings and prepare for a summer that would transform him irrevocably. The Death Eater was about to be born from the ashes of the boy who had once believed in friendship and love. It was a birth he had chosen, step by step, compromise by compromise, and like all births, it would be painful and bloody and impossible to reverse. But in the deepest part of his heart, carefully locked away where even Voldemort's legilimency couldn't reach, a small flame still burned. Green as spring, warm as summer afternoons in a playground, bright as a girl's laughter. He told himself it meant nothing, changed nothing. He was wrong about that, as he was wrong about so many things. That flame would one day consume everything he was becoming, burn away the darkness and leave only truth behind. But that redemption was years away, and first would come the fall, complete and terrible and entirely of his own making. The path to becoming a Death Eater was clear. All that remained was to walk it to its bitter end, carrying his secrets and his shame and his carefully buried love into the heart of darkness itself. The summer of 1978 arrived with unseasonable heat that turned Spinner's End into a suffocating prison of brick and despair. Severus had graduated from Hogwarts with the highest Newty scores in potions and defense against the dark arts in 50 years, achievements that should have opened any door in the wizarding world. Instead, he knelt in a circle of black-robed figures, his left arm extended, waiting for the brand that would close more doors than it opened. The ceremony took place in a manor house he didn't recognize, its windows darkened, its walls thrumming with protective enchantments. Around him knelt other initiates, some recent Hogwarts graduates like himself, others older witches and wizards drawn by promise of power or pushed by desperation. He recognized Evan Rosier from school, Wilkes, who had been 2 years ahead, and others whose names he knew but faces he had never truly seen until now, when they were all equal in their subservience. Voldemort moved among them like a serpent through grass, his presence both terrible and magnetic. When he reached Severus, those red eyes, when had they become red, bore into him with surgical precision. "Severus Snape," he said softly, his voice carrying despite its quietness, "you come to me with such interesting contradictions, brilliance and bitterness, power and poverty, love and hatred. Tell me, what is it you truly seek in my service?" The question was a test Severus knew. Others had given grand speeches about blood purity and wizarding supremacy. But Voldemort had already seen into his mind, knew the tangles of his motivations. "Only honesty would serve here, Harpus," Severus answered. "I seek to matter." A cold smile touched Voldemort's lipless mouth. To matter, yes. To be more than the unwanted half-blood from the wrong side of town. To show them all, the pure-bloods who condescended, the muggles who scorned, the girl who rejected. "You seek to matter, and in my service you shall." He pressed his wand to Severus's outstretched arm, and pain beyond description flooded through him. It wasn't just physical agony, but a spiritual violation, the very essence of his being marked and claimed. The skull and serpent burned themselves into his flesh and deeper, into his magical core itself. He was being rewritten at a fundamental level, bound in ways that transcended simple loyalty oaths. When it was over, Severus looked at the mark writhing on his pale skin and felt a complex mixture of triumph and revulsion. He had done it. He belonged. He was a Death Eater, part of something larger than himself. The boy from Spinner's End had been transformed into someone who mattered. Why then did he feel so empty? The months that followed were a dark education in the reality of Voldemort's revolution. Severus had expected to be valued for his potion-making skills, perhaps set to brewing complex drafts for the cause. Instead, he found himself part of raids that grew progressively more violent. His knowledge of Muggle areas made him useful for planning attacks. His invented curses proved devastatingly effective in combat. His youth and relatively unknown status let him move in places where marked Death Eaters couldn't go. He told himself the violence was necessary, part of the revolution that would reshape their world. The Muggles who died were casualties of war. The wizards who resisted were traitors to their own kind. The fear spreading through magical Britain was birth pangs of a new order. But late at night, when he returned to Spinner's End covered in smoke and worse, the justifications rang hollow. He would sit in his childhood room staring at the faded wallpaper and wonder how he had traveled so far from the boy who made flowers dance for a red-haired girl's smile. His mother knew what he had become. She never said anything directly, but her eyes held a grief deeper than words when she looked at his covered left arm. His father, drunk more often than not, remained oblivious to the darkness that had claimed his son. Sometimes Severus envied him that ignorance. The work grew darker as Voldemort's power increased. What had begun as targeted strikes against specific enemies evolved into terror campaigns designed to break the wizarding world's will. Severus became an expert at extracting information. His knowledge of legilimency combined with precisely brewed truth serums making him invaluable for interrogations. He learned to compartmentalize, to shut down the parts of himself that recoiled from causing pain, to become the weapon Voldemort required. But he couldn't shut down everything. Reports of Order of the Phoenix activities often included mentions of familiar names. The Potters were active members fighting against everything Severus had sworn to serve. And always, there was mention of Lily Potter, née Evans, brilliant witch and fierce opponent of dark arts. She had married Potter. The news, when it reached him, felt like Sectum Sempra turned inward. His childhood enemy had claimed his childhood love, and they now stood together against him. The irony was excruciating. He had become everything he thought would make him worthy of her, accumulating power and knowledge and respect, only to find it had made him her enemy instead. He began drinking, not like his father's mindless excess, but with calculated purpose. Fire whiskey to blur the memories of what he did in Voldemort's name. Dreamless sleep potion to escape the nightmares where green eyes looked at him with disgust. Anything to silence the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Lily, asking what he had become. It was during a raid in autumn of 1979 that everything changed. They were attacking a safe house suspected of harboring Order members. Severus was part of the advance team, his role to disable the protective wards. As he worked, he heard voices inside, familiar voices that made his blood freeze. "We should move again," a male voice said. "James Potter, the Fidelius charm would be safer. We can't keep running, James." And there was Lily, her voice older but unmistakable. "Besides, Dumbledore says these protections are sufficient, for now, but with the baby coming, baby." The word hit Severus like a physical blow. Lily was pregnant. The girl he had loved was carrying his enemy's child, building a life and family while he destroyed lives and families in service to darkness. He should have called for the others, completed the mission. Instead, he found himself strengthening the wards instead of breaking them, adding subtle protections that would buy the occupants time to escape. When the other Death Eaters arrived, he reported that the wards were too strong, that they needed to retreat and replan. Voldemort was displeased by the failure, but not suspicious. Severus had built a reputation for competence that one failure couldn't shake. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The image of Lily, pregnant and in danger from people like him, had cracked the ice around his heart. He began to pay closer attention to Order movements, telling himself it was intelligence gathering. But really, he was tracking her, ensuring she wasn't in locations targeted for attacks. It was a dangerous game, but he had become skilled at dangerous games. His occlumency was now strong enough to hide even from Voldemort, as long as he was careful. The war escalated through 1980. The Order grew bolder. The the Death Eaters more vicious in response. Severus rose in the ranks, his potions and strategic mind making him invaluable. Voldemort began including him in inner circle meetings, where the true scope of the Dark Lord's ambitions became clear. This wasn't about elevating wizardkind or reforming society. This was about power, pure and simple, with Voldemort as immortal ruler of a world remade in his image. The doubts Severus had been suppressing grew stronger. He had joined for belonging, for purpose, for power, but what he had found was slavery, cruelty, and a master who viewed his followers as tools to be used and discarded. The pure-blood rhetoric was a lie. Voldemort himself was a half-blood. The promise of a better world was propaganda masking simple tyranny. But what could he do? The mark bound him. Betrayal meant death, and not a clean death either. He had seen what happened to those who tried to leave or betray the Dark Lord. More than that, who would trust him if he tried to defect? He was a known Death Eater, responsible for terrible things. The Order would kill him on sight, and they would be right to do so. So he continued, hating himself more with each passing day, taking refuge in occlumency and alcohol and the small rebellions of warned targets and failed missions. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to make a difference. In truth, he was a coward, too afraid to act, too deep to escape. Everything changed on a cold night in late 1980. Voldemort had summoned him for a private meeting, a rare honor that filled Severus with dread. These personal audiences usually meant special assignments, the kind that left deeper stains on what remained of his soul. Severus, Voldemort said, gesturing him to sit, I have a task that requires your particular talents. There is a position open at Hogwarts, Potions Master. The current instructor is retiring. I want you to apply. You want me to spy on Dumbledore. It was the obvious conclusion, among other things, but primarily, I want you positioned to recruit. These children are the future, and we must ensure they are guided properly. Your youth will be an asset. You're barely older than some of the 7th years. They'll relate to you, trust you. Severus nodded, his mind already working through the implications. Returning to Hogwarts meant proximity to memories he had tried to bury, but it also meant distance from the worst of the Death Eater activities, a chance to be something more than an instrument of terror. There's more, Voldemort continued. I'm sending you to the Hog's Head tomorrow night. Dumbledore is interviewing another candidate there, some fraud of a seer. I want to know what kind of person he's considering. Observe and report back. It seemed a simple enough task. Severus arrived at the Hog's Head under concealment charms, positioning himself where he could hear the interview. The woman, Sybil Trelawney, was indeed a fraud, speaking in dramatic tones about inner eyes and mystical visions. Dumbledore seemed politely skeptical. Then everything changed. Trelawney's voice suddenly shifted, becoming deep and otherworldly, real prophecy, unmistakable to anyone who had studied the art. Severus leaned closer, straining to hear every word. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, his blood turned to ice, a prophecy about Voldemort's defeat. He had to hear more, had to. A hand fell on his shoulder. Aberforth Dumbledore, the barman, had found him. In the struggle that followed, Severus heard only fragments more mark him as his equal, and power the Dark Lord knows not, before he was ejected from the pub. But he had heard enough to know this was crucial intelligence, enough to doom whoever the prophecy spoke of. He reported to Voldemort immediately, reciting the partial prophecy with perfect recall. The Dark Lord's red eyes blazed with terrible interest. Born as the 7th month dies, to those who have thrice defied me, he was already calculating, determining who fit the criteria. This is valuable indeed, Severus. You have done well. Severus accepted the praise with a bow, but inside, unease crawled through him like ice. Something about this felt different, more ominous than typical intelligence. But he pushed the feeling aside. He had done his duty, nothing more. It was weeks later when the terrible truth reached him. Voldemort had interpreted the prophecy, identified 2 possible children who fit the criteria. The Longbottom boy was one possibility. The other was Harry Potter, Lily's son. The child Severus had known she was carrying, the baby who would have her eyes and his enemy's messy hair. The innocent who had done nothing but be born to parents who fought against darkness, and Voldemort had chosen him, decided that the half-blood child like himself was the greater threat, marked the Potters for death, all because of a prophecy Severus had delivered. He had signed Lily's death warrant. The realization hit him with the force of a killing curse. Everything he had done, every crime he had committed, every piece of his soul he had sold, none of it compared to this. He had delivered the information that would kill the only person he had ever loved. For 3 days he didn't leave his room. His mother, sensing catastrophe, left food outside his door that went untouched. He sat in darkness, staring at nothing, feeling the full weight of his choices crushing down on him. This was where the path had led, not to power or belonging, but to the ultimate betrayal of the one pure thing in his life. On the 4th day, he made his decision. Going to Voldemort was dangerous, potentially suicidal. The Dark Lord did not appreciate followers questioning his decisions, but Severus had to try. He apparated to the manor where Voldemort held court, requested an audience, and knelt before his master with carefully constructed occlumency shields. "My lord," he began, choosing his words with infinite care. "The Potter woman, she is a powerful witch. Might she not be more valuable alive? Turned to our cause, perhaps, or used as leverage?" Voldemort's lipless mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "You speak of the mudblood, Evans. Her magical knowledge is extensive. She was the brightest witch of our generation. Surely such talent, understanding dawned in those terrible eyes. You desire her." It wasn't a question. Severus remained silent, knowing denial would be useless. "Very well," Voldemort said after a long moment. "I shall offer her the chance to step aside. If she is as intelligent as you claim, she will take it. But the boy must die, Severus. The prophecy is clear." "Of course, my lord." The words tasted like ash. "I ask only for her life, and you shall have it if she chooses wisely. Now go. Your sentimentality bores me." Severus left, knowing he had likely signed his own death warrant. Voldemort would remember this moment of weakness, file it away for future consideration. But it didn't matter. He had tried to save her. It wasn't enough, could never be enough, but he had tried. But even as he apparated away, he knew the truth. Lily would never step aside. She would die defending her son, and Voldemort would kill her without a second thought. The Dark Lord's promise was worthless, and Severus had debased himself for nothing. That night he stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea, wondering if the fall would be enough to kill a wizard. The mark burned on his arm, a constant reminder of his bondage. He had no way out, no hope of redemption. He should just end it, take the coward's way out before he could cause more damage. But as he stood there, wind whipping his hair, he thought of Lily, not the woman she had become, married to his enemy and marked for death, but the girl who had seen magic in him when everyone else saw only strangeness. She had believed he could be more than his circumstances. Even at the end, she had said he could be anything. He stepped back from the edge. If he couldn't save her through Voldemort, perhaps there was another way. It would mean betraying everything he had sworn to serve, becoming the very thing Death Eaters were trained to hunt. It would mean approaching the one wizard Voldemort feared, admitting his crimes and begging for help. It would mean choosing Lily over everything else, the way he should have done years ago. The path to Hogwarts had never seemed longer. Each step took him further from what he had become and closer to what he should have been. By the time he reached the gates, dawn was breaking, painting the castle in shades of gold that reminded him painfully of childhood possibilities. Dumbledore was waiting in his office as if he had expected this visit. Those blue eyes, so different from Voldemort's red, saw through Severus just as thoroughly but with compassion rather than calculation. "Severus," he said gently, "I wondered when you would come." And Severus Snape, Death Eater, murderer, fallen prodigy, fell to his knees and begged for the only thing that mattered. Save her, please, save Lily. The turn had come at last. The path that had led into darkness would now lead toward redemption, though the cost would be higher than he could imagine. But for Lily, he would pay any price, even his life, especially his life. The boy from Spinner's End had finally chosen love over power. It was too late to save himself, but perhaps, it might not be too late to save her. October 31st, 1981 began like any other day in the small cottage at Godric's Hollow. The Fidelius charm held strong, wrapping the Potter home in layers of magical protection that should have been impenetrable. Inside, a young family went about their evening routine, James Potter playing with his son on the living room floor, making colourful smoke rings from his wand that caused baby Harry to giggle and reach with chubby fingers. Lily Potter in the kitchen preparing dinner with the efficient grace that characterized everything she did. Miles away, in the dungeons of Hogwarts, Severus Snape was brewing a particularly complex batch of verite serum for the school's stores. The familiar ritual of chopping, stirring, and timing should have been soothing, but tonight his hands trembled slightly as he added the jobberknoll feathers. Something felt wrong in the air, a tension like the moment before lightning strikes. He had been Dumbledore's spy for nearly a year now, walking the impossible line between Death Eater and Order member. Every piece of information he passed to Dumbledore was a risk, every meeting with Voldemort a dance on the edge of discovery. But he had managed it, driven by the desperate need to protect Lily, to somehow atone for setting this nightmare in motion. The Potters had gone into hiding immediately after Dumbledore warned them of the prophecy. The Fidelius charm was unbreakable, as long as the secret keeper remained loyal. Sirius Black, James's best friend, the most loyal person Severus could imagine, even through his hatred. They were safe. They had to be safe. The summons came like ice through his veins. The dark mark burned with an urgency he had rarely felt, a celebration rather than a call to arms. Something had happened, something significant. He barely had time to send his Patronus to Dumbledore, silver doe that bounded away with desperate grace, before he had to respond to the summons. To delay would raise suspicions he couldn't afford. The gathering place was chaos when he arrived. Death Eaters were celebrating, their masks discarded in their euphoria. Wine flowed freely and shouts of triumph filled the air. Severus's stomach turned to lead even before he heard the words, "The Potters are dead. The Dark Lord has fulfilled the prophecy." The world tilted, whole sound became distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. Someone thrust a goblet into his hand, clapped him on the back. He must have responded appropriately, because no one seemed to notice that he was drowning in plain sight. Both of them, he heard himself ask, voice steady through occlumency alone. The blood traitor and his mudblood wife, yes, though something strange happened with the boy. The Dark Lord's body was destroyed, but surely he'll return. He has conquered death itself. The boy, Harry, which meant Lily was dead. The words wouldn't process, couldn't process. She couldn't be dead. He had done everything, sacrificed everything, betrayed everything to keep her safe. Dumbledore had promised. The Fidelius charm was unbreakable, except by betrayal from within. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur. Severus played his part, the loyal Death Eater, concerned about their master's disappearance but confident in his return. Inside he was screaming, dying, shattering into pieces too small to ever reassemble. When he could finally escape, he apparated not to Hogwarts but to Godric's Hollow. The house stood partially destroyed, the roof blown off one side, dark mark fading above it like a diseased star. The Aurors had come and gone, leaving only warning tape and silence. Severus slipped past the barriers with practiced ease, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. The living room showed signs of struggle. James's body had been removed, but the outline remained, a shadow on the floor where he had died trying to give his family time to escape. Wandless, the fool had faced Voldemort without even drawing his wand, trusting in protections that had already failed. The stairs creaked under Severus's weight as he climbed, each step an agony of anticipation and dread. He knew what he would find, knew and couldn't stop himself from looking. The nursery door hung off its hinges. Inside, the cheerful yellow walls were scorched, toys scattered like casualties of war. And there, in front of the crib, she lay as if sleeping, green eyes closed, red hair spread across the floor like spilled wine. Even in death she was beautiful, though pale as winter moonlight. No visible wounds, the killing curse left no marks, just absence where life had been. Severus fell to his knees beside her, reaching out with shaking hands but unable to touch. To touch would make it real, would acknowledge that the girl who had shown him magic, the woman who had been his conscience and his hope, was gone forever. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words inadequate, pathetic. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I tried to save you, but trying hadn't been enough." He had delivered the prophecy that marked her. He had trusted Dumbledore to protect her. He had believed that somehow, despite all his failures, he could keep her safe from the consequences of his choices. A sound from the crib made him look up. Harry was there, sitting quietly, a livid lightning bolt scar on his forehead, but otherwise unharmed. Those eyes, Lily's eyes, stared at Severus with infant solemnity. Holt who had survived the killing curse. The boy who lived, they would call him. The reason Lily was dead, because she had stood between Voldemort and her son, had died rather than step aside. Hatred and guilt warred in Severus's chest as he looked at the baby. James Potter's son, who would probably grow up arrogant and entitled like his father. But also Lily's son, with her eyes and perhaps her heart. Footsteps on the stairs. Dumbledore appeared in the doorway, looking older than Severus had ever seen him. His blue eyes took in the scene. Severus kneeling by Lily's body, the baby in the crib, the destruction that spoke of evil's visit. "Severus," he said gently, "you said you would keep her safe." The words came out raw, bleeding. "You promised. I failed. No excuses, no explanations, just acknowledgement of the catastrophic failure. The secret keeper betrayed them, not Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew. They switched at the last moment, thinking to be clever. Pettigrew, the rat who had followed James and Sirius like a shadow, desperate for their approval. Of course, the weak link, the one no one would suspect. Clever indeed, and fatal. He killed her." Severus's voice was strange, distant. "Voldemort offered to spare her. I asked. I begged him to spare her. She could have lived if she had stepped aside, but she chose to die for the boy. That choice," Dumbledore said softly, "is why Voldemort is gone. Her sacrifice created a protection he couldn't breach. Harry survived because Lily died for him. Love, Severus, the power the Dark Lord knows not. Love, yes, Severus understood love. It was the knife in his chest, the poison in his veins, the emptiness where his heart used to be. Love was what had driven him to darkness in search of worthiness. Love was what had brought him crawling back to the light, too late to matter. Love was lying dead on the floor while her son lived on, marked by destiny and sacrifice. "What happens to the boy?" he asked, surprising himself. "He'll go to his aunt, Lily's sister, Petunia, the magic-hating muggle who had made Lily cry with her cruelty. She'll hate him, perhaps, but the blood protection will keep him safe. Lily's sacrifice runs in her sister's veins, however diluted. Safe, as if safety mattered when everything worth protecting was already gone." Severus stood slowly, feeling centuries old. He looked down at Lily one last time, memorizing her face, though he knew it would haunt him forever anyway. Then he turned to Dumbledore, and in his eyes was something that made the old wizard step back. "I'll do whatever you ask," he said, voice dead as winter. "I'll protect the boy, spy for you, play whatever role you need. But know this, I do it for her, only for her. Because I failed her in life, and this is all I have left to give her in death." "That will be enough," Dumbledore said quietly. They left the ruined house together, Severus not looking back because he knew if he did he would never leave. Outside, the world went on as if nothing had changed. People were celebrating Voldemort's defeat, shooting sparks into the sky, toasting Harry Potter, the boy who lived. None of them knew the true cost. None of them understood that a woman's love had saved them all, that her sacrifice would echo through the years in ways they couldn't imagine. None of them knew that in a dungeon office, a man would spend the rest of his life atoning for betrayals that could never be forgiven. The night had changed everything. Voldemort was gone but not dead. Severus knew him too well to believe he could be so easily defeated. Harry Potter was marked by prophecy and sacrifice, destined for greatness or tragedy, or both. And Severus Snape was bound by love and guilt to protect the son of the woman he had loved and the man he had hated. As he returned to Hogwarts, to the dungeons that would be his self-imposed prison, Severus felt the weight of the years ahead settling on his shoulders. He would play the Death Eater for those who remained loyal to Voldemort's memory. He would play the harsh professor for students who would never know he was protecting them. He would play the villain in Harry Potter's story because that was the role required of him, all for those green eyes that would never look at him again except through her son's face, all for the memory of a girl who had seen him as more than he was and inspired him to become less than he could have been. The night everything changed was over. The long penance had begun. In the depths of Hogwarts, Severus Snape sat at his desk and began planning how to protect Harry Potter without seeming to, how to prepare for Voldemort's inevitable return, how to live when the only person who had made life worthwhile was gone. He opened his advanced potions textbook, the one filled with his innovations and inventions. In the margins, next to spells designed to harm and potions perfected for power, he began writing new notes. Protection spells disguised as punishment, healing draughts that could be slipped into food, ways to strengthen a boy without him knowing he was being strengthened. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could redeem what he had done. It wasn't even really living, but it was purpose, and purpose would have to be enough. He would guard Lily's son, prepare him for what was coming, ensure her sacrifice meant something. And perhaps in some distant year when his tasks were complete and his sins accounted for, he might finally be allowed to rest, to close his eyes and see not the nursery floor but a playground in Cokeworth where two children discovered magic in each other and believed it would be enough to overcome anything. But that was for the future. For now, there was only the work, the watching, the waiting. Severus Snape, the half-blood prince, the Death Eater, the most faithful servant of Albus Dumbledore, began his longest role, protector of Harry Potter, guardian of Lily Evans's legacy, and keeper of secrets that would define the fate of the wizarding world. The night everything changed was over. The years of penance had begun, and so, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the life of Severus Snape. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, let us rest for a moment on the profound complexities of this man who walked between light and darkness, whose story reminds us that love can be both our greatest weakness and our most powerful strength. From the grey streets of Spinner's End to the ancient stones of Hogwarts, from childhood friendship to adult sacrifice, Severus Snape's path was neither simple nor straight. He was a man of contradictions, brilliant yet bitter, powerful yet powerless, cruel in his actions yet motivated by the deepest love. His story teaches us that redemption is possible, even for those who have walked the darkest paths, that our choices define us more than our circumstances, and that love, true love, transcends even death itself. As you close your eyes and let sleep embrace you, think perhaps of the courage it takes to play the villain when you long to be the hero. Think of the strength required to protect someone who reminds you daily of your greatest failure and deepest love. Think of a man who spent 17 years preparing a boy for a destiny that would require enormous sacrifice, all while maintaining a facade of hatred that must have burned like acid on his soul. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent to human struggles, yet somehow Severus Snape's story reaches beyond the personal to touch something universal. We all carry regrets. We all wonder about paths not taken, words not spoken, choices that led us away from who we might have been. But Severus's life shows us that it's never too late to choose love over hatred, sacrifice over selfishness, protection over power. In the end, when the final truth was revealed through silvery memories in a pensieve, the world learned what we have discovered tonight, that Severus Snape was perhaps the bravest man in a story full of heroes, not because he was without fear, but because he faced his fears every day, not because he was without fault, but because he spent his life atoning for his faults. As your breathing deepens and your mind begins to wander into dreams, remember that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose. We can choose bitterness or forgiveness, hatred or love, darkness or light. Severus Snape chose darkness for many years, but when it mattered most, he chose love. And that choice, that single moment of putting someone else's life above his own desires, set in motion a redemption that would save the wizarding world. Sleep now, and dream perhaps of a doe Patronus running through a dark forest, silver and eternal, carrying messages of protection and love. Dream of a man standing at a window, watching over a boy who doesn't know he's being watched, protecting him with a devotion that transcends death. Dream of green eyes that see the best in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. For in the end, Severus Snape's story is a reminder that we are more than our worst moments, more than our greatest failures. We are the sum of all our choices, and as long as we draw breath, we have the power to choose differently, to choose better, to choose love. The dungeons of Hogwarts are quiet now, the potions classroom empty of its stern master. But somewhere in the spaces between memory and dream, between what was and what might have been, a young boy with dark hair makes flowers dance for a girl with green eyes, and for that moment, all is well. Rest peacefully, dear listener. Let the story of Severus Snape remind you that even the darkest night gives way to dawn, that love endures beyond all endings, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never seek the light, but choose to serve it anyway. Always. Sweet dreams.